All right, good evening. I'm gonna start tagging people. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? I'm just tagging some friends here to let them know we are on if they're available to come hang out. So Marshall's going to be joining us here in just a minute. Exciting. Hey, John, I see you. Deirdre, I see you. Trying to. All right. Hey, Marshall. There you go.
Stephen, how you doing, brother?
I am doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good today. Doing fine.
Oh, excellent. Very good.
Been looking
Just
forward
situating
to
myself.
tonight. So,
Oh,
can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Yeah, definitely.
Good.
So, okay. So Marshall the Great is here with us, everybody. He needs no introduction, I don't think, for most of you. Marshall has been sitting with under Malcolm now for quite some time. Actually, I'm not sure how long have you been with Unconditional Love, Marshall?
I met Malcolm for the first time in 2013, so really not all that long. But the way he teaches and describes things, it really made a huge difference for me. And a lot of things came together. So by 2020, he ordained me as one of his ministers. So I've been very blessed.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. And so guys, I'm so excited for everybody here to get to know Marshall a little more. I've been learning from Marshall now for a little over a year, almost on a weekly basis. And I want you guys to know that he's a wealth of knowledge. He's certainly not afraid of any of your questions. And a lot of what I share with you guys, I've learned from Marshall. And so it's sometimes when when he's teaching in his, well, I guess I don't know if I should say it or not, but there's a Bible study that Marshall participates on and I get to be a part of. And a lot of what comes from there, I put it into our this Thursday nights, and he's a blessing, guys. I've given Marshall to have full reign over tonight, so however long he wants to take, it is entirely, it's all on him. And then afterwards, don't forget. So after Marshall's done with the presentation, I'll open up a hangout room for us all to go and hang out, and maybe you can bring your comments, questions, and thoughts, and all of that to him. I'm sure that Marshall would love to spend some time. I know that he would love to spend some time with you in that group. So, So Marshall, man, take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay, guys. Well, hello, everyone. Glad you could join us tonight. Stephen had asked me about a month or so ago if I would be willing to be one of his guest speakers. And so the Lord has made that possible. I say that just because, unfortunately, I've been diagnosed with what's called multiple myeloma, found out right before Christmas. And so I've been undergoing cancer treatments, but in all honesty, I feel pretty good. And I have a bad day occasionally, but most of the time, the Lord has been so gracious to me that it is. I feel as though I'm recovering very quickly, and as a matter of fact, I'm trusting the Lord for that. So I appreciate your prayers. Stephen had also told me that could teach on whatever I wanted to, whether it was simply giving a testimony or picking some topic that I'd like to cover. I thought about the testimony, but and had even written a lot of it out, but the Lord did compelled me. I just got the urging that there were some things in the study that Stephen has been doing in Colossians that would probably be very beneficial. That's for all of you guys. That is always my prayer, whether I'm doing a sermon on Sunday or a Bible study or whatever, I always ask the Lord, what is it that you guys need to hear? And so that's what I have settled on tonight, is a continuation in Colossians, and you'll recognize some of it because Stephen has gone over some of this with you already. So you'll just get a double dose, but that's fine because Colossians is one of the most profound letters that Paul ever wrote. So if you can grasp some of the things that we're sharing with you tonight, then I think that you will come away with a more intimate view of who you are in Christ. So with that, let's get started. Colossians reveals to us some incredible truths. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start with a few of the verses, read them right out of the scripture, beginning in verse 15 of chapter 1. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Just that phrase probably eludes a lot of people, but you're going to have a better understanding of it, I hope, by the time that we finish tonight. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. That's going to be the main subject of what we're going to talk about tonight. And some just incredible statements, astounding, amazing statements, that as you begin to understand and unpack the meaning of them, it's like Malcolm says, the words astounding and amazing literally mean to stand outside yourself and look with awe. I think we all understand that. But it says, for by him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth. All those things means you and me. We are the things. John echoes the same truth in chapter 1 of his gospel when he says, for all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. That is you and I. It is when he said, let us make man in our image, Father, Son, and Spirit, he was talking about you. He could have said, let us make Stephen in our image, or any one of you guys that are viewing tonight. He is before all things, and in him all things consist. Is this a phenomenon that is true only of the incarnate Christ? In other words, when God became a man? Or has God been far more active in the human race and in his creation than we often are taught or give him credit for, dating back into the Old Testament and even beyond? most of the evangelical teaching we receive in the modern church focuses almost exclusively on the New Testament and the New Covenant, and that's fine. And I'm not criticizing that, but I am here to tell you, if you really want to understand the richness of the gospel, then there are many things in the Old Testament that'll benefit you greatly. In the Hebrews language, for example, there's a word that is used pervasively throughout the Hebrew Bible. Matter of fact, it's used over 7,000 times, and it is not translated into our English Bibles once. Not in the Hebrew, not in the Old Testament. It's the word or the term Aleph Tav, which is the first letter and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's more familiar to us in, as I said, the New Testament, because that's what we focus on primarily. And it's translated into the Greek as the Alpha and the Omega. Well, we've all heard that. Certainly we see it a couple of times in the book of Revelation. And it says that or actually the term itself is a preposition or a grammatical tool, in other words, that points to the object of the verb in the sentence or in the scripture and its action. We see this this is how important this is. We see it for the very first time in the very beginning of Scripture, in the very first verse. It literally says, in the beginning, Elohim filled the sky and the land. Now, I know your English version says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Hebrews really didn't understand heavens, not like we do today, not with the telescopes and the satellites and all the things that we're able to peer into the depths of the universe. They simply understood there's the sky and there's the land. And that's the way it literally starts out. So if we could read that in Hebrew, and believe me, I am no Hebrew scholar by any means, but if we could read it in Hebrew, it would literally say Elohim filled, which is the actual word for bara, which means that we've translated created. It means Elohim filled the sky, Aleph Tav, and the land, Aleph Tav. As I said, our scholars and our translators have decided that that term just doesn't fit, and so they simply mark it as being untranslatable. And yet it fills the scripture. The problem is they simply didn't understand what it was saying. We read, this is how important this is. We read in the New Testament, obviously written in Greek, in Revelation 1:8, it says, I am the Alpha and Omega, or the Aleph Tav. The beginning and the end, says the Lord, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. In Revelation 22:13, he says it again. He says, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Remember that phrase in the verse that we read? He said he is the firstborn above all creation. Here we are seeing that he is the first. He is the source. As a matter of fact, you could take that verse in 22, chapter 22, and say, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, and the word there in Greek is the source of, or the catalyst, or the initiator, and the end. And the word there is teleos, which means the completion, or as we'll see in a few moments, the consummation. The first what? The first and the last. The first word, he is the word, and he is the last word on all things. Nothing was made that he didn't make. I might interject this. It's not in my notes, but just as an aside, if nothing was created that he didn't create, did he create death? Did he create darkness? Did he create blindness? No, he didn't. These are all constructs that man has produced, because we as co-inheritors are also co-creators in Christ. We'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. What Jesus is saying is is that all creation, past, present, and future, exist in him, beginning with the sky and the land, or the heavens and the earth. This passage, interpreted by Hebrew scholars, literally means the ever unfolding one. Well, you could say a lot about that, but we're not going to get into it tonight, other than to say that God is dynamic in his existence. In other words, he is not static. He is ever moving. We'll see that agape love is dynamic. The rabbis also interpret this term Aleph Tav, or Alpha Omega, as the first matter out of which all things were formed, or the substance of the things. Therefore, when we see the Aleph Tav inserted into Genesis 1:1, the substance of heaven and earth, or sky and land, we recognize it as the autograph of our Creator, the Word, Christ Jesus. It's his signature on a beautiful painting. It's the signature on his work. It's inserted there to remind us of these very things that we're reading about in Colossians, and the defining or meanings of Aleph Tav. The word for good, by the way, when God says it is good or it is very good, can also mean beautiful. So as he stood back and looked at what he had created, portrayed, painted, he was thinking how beautiful this is. You know what? When he made man, he said that we were very good. That means that he thinks we are absolutely beautiful. As we read in Colossians, he said, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. All things were created through him and for him. He is the Alpha Omega, in which we live and move and have our being. By the way, when we're in as intimate of a relationship as we are with God, that goes both directions. We are the place, and as we read further in Colossians in chapter 2, that God has his, God lives and moves and has his being in the physical world. Think about that. Hebrew is a very pictorial language. Its letters are represented with pictures as was necessary for the people. The children of Israel, by and large, they had been nothing but slaves, and they were not educated. They were illiterate. So they might not be able to read words, but they could understand what was being communicated by the pictures that the letters represented. As I mentioned, the Aleph Tav was translated on occasion, most of the time, as the preposition identifying a certain action, but it also represented a noun on several occasions. We read an example of this in Joel chapter 3, verse 10, where it says, beat your plowshares into swords. The word plowshare there is Aleph Tav also. Very interesting definition. It says a plowshare, of course, is the metal point of the plowhead, which cuts through and turns the underlying soil in order to create a furrow in which to plant seed. Because I believe much of Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, is allegory. When we see terms such as turning soil, the garden, the land, it is not simply speaking of a physical reality, but an allegorical one, which is pointing to the heart and mind of man. Before the fall of man, in which we chose the Adamic mindset, it says that we dwelled in the Garden of Eden, which means the place of paradise and the place of delight. So the mind of Christ, we can deduce from that, is a place of great pleasure and enjoyment. No fears, no anxieties, no worries, but simply a complete and total confidence in the God for whom nothing is impossible. This plowshare is literally is in a manner revealing to us this condition that man found himself in, that God was determined to overcome, to reverse. It says when we see this when we understand the original pictograph of the word for Aleph Tav. And we see a clear connection between it and its meaning. The first letter, Aleph, the first letter in the alphabet of the Hebrews, was symbolized by an ox head. The second, Tav, was symbolized by two crossed sticks, which served as a marker. When combined, the word meant an ox moving toward the mark. Fields were plowed in ancient Israel, pulled by a pair of oxen, and it still is in many parts of the world today. But in order to keep the furrows straight, the driver of the ox would aim toward a mark such as a tree or a rock outcropping in the distance. And that's what he would aim at. Therefore, the Aleph or ox head, which also represents strength or power, because it was usually an ox was a bull and very powerful, it also represented God to the Hebrews. So that power was represented in God to them. The mark was the cross sticks that could be seen that they were to move toward. When we take it in its entirety, what we see is the strength of God in the blood covenant was represented in a cross of two sticks. Because God is the one who made the covenant. And of course, if you go back and read Genesis 15, it's the story that most of us are familiar with, probably all of us, about Abraham and his experience with God in terms of that covenant. And Abraham was put to sleep, and the covenant was made between God and God, God the Father and God the Son. Excuse me a second. I'm running out of juice here. There. So the cross then becomes the mark of the covenant. The Alpha and the Omega, the Aleph Tav, is the strength of that covenant. The Aleph Tav being Christ, God the Son, and God the man. And as the rabbis said, this is the substance of the whole thing. He is the substance. All things consist in him. This is why we see in the familiar passage in Hebrews 11, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. Christ is that substance. He is our author and our finisher. Faith isn't making something happen. It's the removal of the veil in order to see what already is. And what already is the new creation. You are that new creation. We read in 2 Corinthians 3, but their minds were hardened, for to this day, when they read the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, or the law, a veil lies over their minds. But when a man turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now, once more, those are some very powerful passages, and we see just how beautiful they are when we read a translation that I like called the Jonathan Mitchell New Testament. He does a very literal translation of the Greek. And it says, yet whenever the time should be reached, when the heart can twist and turn upon itself so as to face toward the Lord, the head covering, the veil, is progressively taken from around it. Paul wrote this verse in connection with Exodus 34, when Moses would go into the tent of meeting alone and speak with God. The veil was progressively removed from his eyes as he was able to see more and more clearly who God is. As a matter of fact, it was such a powerful experience that he instituted it in the marriage rites. The same act is performed today by the husband on the bride at the end of the wedding ceremony and continues to this day. That's why at the end of the marriage ceremony, the husband lifts the veil and kisses the bride. This is a powerful picture of our relationship in Christ the groom to which we are the bride. It reveals something very, very intimate and very one, and obviously a picture of two who are becoming one in the flesh, just as we read back in Genesis 2 or in Ephesians 5, to become one. The description also gives a new meaning to the mark, the Tav, or the Omega, which defines the word sin. The strength of God turns the furrow in which the seed is planted, and the mark we move toward is the cross. So if this is a picture of man's fallenness and missing the mark, what is sin then? What is sin exactly? I think sin is to live in a denial, in a world of deception that simply says that Christ and him crucified and our co-crucifixion never took place. It is literally the fall of man in the garden. I shall be as God, for I am both autonomous and independent. Heck, I am God. This is diametrically opposed to the design and plan of God, which is based on relational existence. It's the very essence of the Trinity itself. The Father desiring and in agape love and moving toward the Son doing the same toward the Spirit toward the Father. It's the perichoretic dance that if you've listened to Malcolm very long, you've heard about. It is the movement of love. It is as I mentioned, it is not static. It is constantly in movement toward the object of its love. We get a maybe a little clearer understanding of the entire picture, beginning in the Old Testament up till now, when we have a basic understanding of what the Hebrews meant when they said that God was with them, or that they were with God. The word didn't simply mean to be alongside with, to walk beside. Its actual it conveys the meaning of being together with a continual movement into ever closer proximity. So the whole idea, from the time of the fall until the time of the incarnation, was a movement by God into a closer and closer relationship and proximity with man, to the point that we read in John 14, Jesus' words, he says, you know the Holy Spirit, he was with you, now he is in you. God has accomplished his purpose. As I said, love is a verb in most instances, so we see the desire of love, which, as I say once more, is dynamic, is to move ever closer to the object of its love, or in other words, its beloved, in order to accomplish oneness. You are that beloved, the object, the very object of God's desire. In the Old Covenant, God determined to move mankind ever closer to himself as the fullness of time grew closer and closer. It was completed, according to Hebrews 9:26, at the cross, where it says, but now, once at the end of the age, he has appeared to put away sin, no more missing the mark, by the sacrifice of himself. We began to understand when we realized that the word for end is the same word for finished, as in it is finished, the words of Christ from the cross, that they have the same root and essentially the same meaning. It not only means completion or perfection, which it's often translated as, it means something far more intimate than that. It means consummation. The union of the two who have now become the one flesh. The bridegroom lifting the veil so that the bride can clearly see who it is that she is becoming one with. Thus, at the incarnation, at the crucifixion, and at the resurrection, the work of the plowshare has been completed. The furrow cut and the seed implanted, and that seed is him. It's the culmination of God's desire to fully participate with his creation by becoming a man. As we know, in Genesis, when God created man, we really don't understand it, but within man were both male and female, right? Because he would later take Eve from Adam. He would separate them physically. His goal being, the objective being that one day those who are one would return to such in both physical and spiritual being. That is Christ in you. That is the bridegroom and the bride being in total union in the flesh. As a matter of fact, the word or the passage in Genesis that says when God, just prior to making that separation, he said, it is not good that man should be alone. Well, the immediate reference, of course, was Adam. But the overarching reference was God, the man, Christ Jesus, that he would have a bride. In other words, what would it have accomplished God to become a man without this bride? For God is love. He doesn't just have it, as Malcolm says, he is it. And love must have an object for its desire and its expression of affection. The Creator has always been with his creation. There's never been a point in time when he separated himself from us, as is so popularly taught amongst most of the modern churches. They believe that at the fall, God separated himself from man, but this is not true. We separated ourselves from God. We chose, that was the path that we chose. It says, but this was not reality. This is the illusion that we have created in our own minds. We have to ask ourselves, just from a practical standpoint, how would we exist apart from him? He describes himself as life itself, the way, the truth, the life. Christ is life. So apart from him, we'd not only be as dead as a doornail, we wouldn't exist, period. So we see in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, something that gives us some insight into this, where it says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life. That word keep means to protect. Protect your heart with all diligence. Why? Because out of it the issues of life itself flow. This is the life Jesus spoke of when he said later in the Gospel of John, if, and I would insert, and when you believe in me, out of your heart will flow rivers of living water. And when you believe in me, you'll believe in you. Because there's an interesting scripture in the Passion Translation, for those who are familiar with it, in Colossians 3, verse 4, you'll get to it, Stephen. But it says, when we come to know who Christ is, we'll know who we are, because we're one in his glory. So we see here that the words, when we go back to Proverbs, the word for life, the water that's flowing, the issues, it has a very distinctly powerful meaning. The word for life in Hebrew is the word chai, or I think it's actually pronounced kai, C-H-A-Y. And it consists of two Hebrew words, the first being chet, which means an inner sanctuary. The second, yod, meaning the power of God. Well, you put that together, and we see that within each man, because we all possess life, within the inner chamber, which is the heart, guard your heart with all diligence, because this is where God and man meet. Within the inner chamber of all men, Christ has to exist for that man to exist. This inner sanctuary is referred to in a variety of ways throughout Scripture. It's the Holy of Holies, where God and man meet, as I said. It's also referred to as the heart, as we read here in Proverbs. It's called the tabernacle, or the tent, the secret place of the Most High, the temple. Paul says that, don't you know that you are the temple of God? And that word temple is naos, which means the very inner central area of the temple, or the Holy of Holies. All these things were simply shadows of that which was to come. We read as much in Hebrews 1, says that the Old Testament spoke of the shadows of good things to come. So a great deal of the Old Testament, as I mentioned, is imagery. It's symbolism. And it's talking not so much about where we live, but who we are. So when we read in Colossians, once again, that this is the mystery which has been hidden for ages and generations, but has now been revealed as Christ in you, the hope of glory. We notice that Paul never said it didn't exist in you, but it was simply hidden. How was it hidden? It was obscured by the darkness in the heart of God and of the mind of man. So the incarnation was the plowshare on the mark that would would eventually result in God fully becoming a man, which is exactly what his intention was in eternity past when he and the Father and the Spirit had a conversation one day, if you could imagine it that way, and said, let's create a creature that we can lavish our love upon and who will love us in return, just as we do one another. Let's, with our infinite love, let's expand our agape. In other words, we will expand ourselves. Jesus told the disciples on the road to Emmaus that the Old Testament was all about him, the law, the prophets, the Psalms. I hope that you can see a little more clearly why he would say that. If the Old Testament was all about him, the Aleph Tav, then he is all about you. Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
Wow. Thank you, Marshall. That's so much. It's so good. Lots to unpack there and to chew on and to think about. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope that everyone was simply listening tonight. Since this is recorded, I use a lot of scripture references when I speak. I think that they are the foundation of the points that I attempt to make. But because it's recorded, you can, if it's of interest to you, you can go back and listen to it again. I think you'll pick up a great deal more. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up this video, guys, and then here in just like a couple minutes, if that, I'm going to go ahead and start a group hangout room within this within the Facebook study. And so just give us a couple minutes, and we'll see you over there on the hangout group.